The California Gold Rush of 1848 set the foundation for California's future economic success. The gold rush had many triumphant effects, including a population increase of over 350,000 and brought job opportunities all throughout California. But it also brought with it tragic impacts on the environment and the sudden abandonment of newly created towns. Long before the gold rush, what is now the state of California was a Spanish territory. At the time, Mexico was also a Spanish territory. In 1821, Mexico declared war on Spain to become independent. This was known as the Mexican Independence War. Later that year, Mexico won the war, meaning the land that is now California was Mexican territory. After his election in 1844, President James Polk supported Americans moving west in what was viewed as a God-given right to control all points west to the Pacific Ocean. This is commonly referred to as manifest destiny. As more Americans started traveling west into California, they started to rebel against the Mexican government. In June of 1846, a group of people living in California rose up against the Mexican government in the small city of Sonoma, which is north of present-day San Francisco, with the intention of declaring their independence from Mexico. After their victory, they took a large piece of white cloth and painted on a red star and a bear. Because of this, the independence movement was known as the Bear Flag Revolt. California was an independent republic for a short period of time. President Polk had led the country into the Mexican-American War in April of 1846. At the conclusion of the war, with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on February 2, 1848, the United States added land that includes present-day California and other western states. California officially became a state on September 9, 1850. Just before the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, making California a United States territory, a discovery occurred that would mark the beginning of a period that would have a significant impact on California and the United States. In a town that is in present-day Northern California, James Marshall, a carpenter originally from New Jersey, was working with John Sutter, who was a Swiss immigrant, on Sutter's Fort to build a sawmill. On January 24, 1848, James Marshall looked into the American River and saw something shiny floating in the river. At first, he was unsure on what it was, so he collected the gold-colored pieces and ran tests on them, and found the pieces of gold could be beaten into different shapes, but not broken. After Marshall confirmed it was gold, he told John Sutter. Sutter knew that this discovery would bring large amounts of people to his land and impact the building of his sawmill, so he swore his employees to secrecy. Fortunately, their plan did not work. By March of 1848, the news about the discovery of gold had spread throughout the world because of newspaper articles. Confirmation by President Polk gave even more credibility to the discovery of gold and encouraged more people to head west to California. Soon after their discovery, Marshall and Sutter both passed away due to the effects of poverty, and neither benefited financially from the discovery that should have made them wealthy. News about the discovery of gold was spreading throughout the world. When the discovery was made at Sutter's Mill in 1848, the non-native population was about 14,000. After the discovery of gold, thousands came to California in hopes of finding gold and becoming rich. Ships that were unloading in the port of San Francisco lost crew members because the crew members left for what they saw as a better opportunity in the gold mines. Movement west did not slow down, and over 90,000 people came to California throughout the year of 1849, which was the height of the gold fever. They were referred to as the 49ers. As settlers moved in, gold continued to be found, at least for a while. When gold was found in a new place, a new town was set up. These towns were called boom towns because of the sudden increase of population. Each of the boom towns had churches, banks, libraries, hotels, stores, cemeteries, and jails. but living conditions in these boom towns were actually very poor. Miners worked long hours in unsafe working conditions. The miners paid unreasonably high prices for better food and shelter accommodations. In many towns, store and business owners were almost as wealthy as the miners because of how desperate the miners were for more resources. A pick or a shovel could cost as much as $50. At this time, farmers working in California were getting paid as little as $1 a day, while miners were making up to $16 a week. In the beginning of the gold rush, miners panned for gold by putting water and gravel into a pan. As they shook the pan back and forth, the gold moved to the bottom of the pan, and the miners were able to separate it from the rest of the dirt. Miners also used cradles to mine more gravel and dirt at a time. By 1850, most of the surface gold that was accessible by hand was gone, but new settlers were still arriving. This is when the system of hydraulic mining was created. Hydraulic mining was a system of shooting jets of water into the sides of rock formations to separate them down into sediments. Mercury was then added to the water to separate the sediment from the gold. The equipment for hydraulic mining was very expensive, so the majority of miners worked for large mining companies rather than staying independent because they could not afford the expensive equipment required to be productive. This technique of mining was very successful because it allowed more gold to be found and more quickly, but it caused severe environmental damage. After all the gold was found in a town, the miners would leave the town and travel to the next. When the miners moved on to the different towns, they discovered that all the gold had been found in those towns too. The towns that were once called boom towns were completely abandoned and were now considered ghost towns. When these towns were being abandoned by the miners, the business owners were left in financial ruins. The miners no longer had any source of income, so they were left with no jobs and very little money to support them and their families. During the gold rush, many native people were kicked off their land. The native people who stayed were forced to work as miners for the new settlers. If anybody protested, they were killed. After the native people found the gold for the settlers, the native people were often killed and their scalps were sold for money. Thousands of native people were killed because of conflicts with the new settlers. Gold rush caused a negative impact of lack of labor on non-mining industries in California, as well as Great Britain, China, and Hawaii. All of these places experienced mass immigration. In California, there was now competition for employment. The immigrants were taking away job opportunities from the Americans. Eventually, a tax was placed on all foreign immigrants working in California. In addition to the negative impact on people and business, the gold rush created severe environmental damage. There were large ditches all over the mining sites. Large amounts of dirt and sediment were in the rivers, creating large amounts of silt. Rivers were clogged up with silt. This impacted the flow of water from the mountains to the cities. The environmental impacts were not only a short-term impact. Mercury was added to the water in California, and it is still contaminating the rivers, oceans, and soil there today. Scientists believe that there will be traces of mercury in the water in California for the next 10,000 years. The gold rush lasted from 1848 to 1855. Gold continued to be discovered in other parts of California. It was a significant contributor to California's economy. Continued settlement and expansion of non-mining businesses were made possible by the continued discovery of gold. Some of the ghost towns are still abandoned today, while others are very popular tourist attractions. Some of the most famous ones are state parks, such as Bodie in the Sierra Nevada mountains near Yosemite National Park. Another is the Marshall Gold Discovery State Park that includes a museum and a replica of the original Sutter's Mill where the gold rush began. Over 300,000 people each year come to see ghost towns and learn about the history of the gold rush. The California Gold Rush has changed the history and culture of California through triumphant growth of economic success and the tragic effects that came with it.